Adam Locke had been a ranger for almost 10 years, but he had never worked a station quite like Cedar Fall. The forest sat in a long valley ringed by old mountains, far enough from any highway that cell signal came and went like a rumor. He had transferred in 3 weeks earlier, after a fire season that had burned through his old district, and he was still learning the trails when his new supervisor called him into the station office for the first time. Nathaniel Graves did not look like a man who spent much time outdoors. He was tall and pale, with very still hands and a way of watching people that made Adam feel, more than once, like he was being read rather than looked at. His voice was calm, almost too calm, every word measured out like he had rehearsed it. "You will find Cedar Fall quiet," Graves said, sliding a folder of trail maps across the desk. "Quieter than most districts your size. We do not get many visitors out here, and the wildlife keeps mostly to itself. I expect you will settle in well." "Any trouble spots I should know about?" Adam asked, scanning the map. There was a section in the northwest corner, deep in old-growth timber, marked simply as restricted, no further explanation given. "Nothing that concerns regular patrol," Graves said smoothly. "That section is closed to the public. Old survey equipment, mostly. Leave it be and it will leave you be." Adam nodded, the way a new hire nods at a boss he has not yet learned to question, and did not think much more about it. It would be almost 2 weeks before he understood that Nathaniel Graves had been watching him far more closely, in those first days, than any ordinary supervisor ever watches a new ranger learning his way around a quiet stretch of forest. The first strange night came 11 days into the job, on a routine patrol along the western boundary. Adam had stayed out later than planned, chasing a report of a downed hiker that turned out to be nothing, just an empty camp and a dead fire, and by the time he started back toward the station the sky had gone fully dark, stars sharp and close the way they only get far from any city light. He was crossing a ridge above a long stretch of pine when the light came. It did not flash or streak the way he expected a meteor to behave. It simply appeared, low over the treeline, a pale blue-white glow that pulsed slowly, like something breathing, and it moved without sound, drifting down toward the forest floor far faster than anything that size should have been able to descend. Adam stopped walking and watched it disappear below the canopy, somewhere northwest of his position, in the exact direction of the restricted section on his map. His radio gave him nothing but static when he tried to call it in. His truck, parked a half-mile back at the trailhead, started fine, but the dashboard lights flickered oddly for several seconds before settling. He told himself, driving back to the station in the dark, that it had probably been a drone, or a weather balloon catching the moonlight wrong, or any of the dozen boring explanations that experienced rangers reach for before letting themselves consider anything stranger. He did not entirely believe it, but it was late and he was tired, and the restricted section was not his to investigate without authorization. He decided he would mention it to Graves in the morning and see what his new supervisor had to say. Graves listened to the report the next morning with an expression that did not change at all, not even slightly, which struck Adam as strange in itself. Most people, hearing a ranger describe a silent light dropping into the forest at night, showed at least a flicker of curiosity, or skepticism, or concern. Graves showed nothing. "Likely a weather balloon," he said, exactly the explanation Adam had already half-talked himself into. "We get them drifting through from the research stations up north more often than people realize. I would not concern yourself with it." "It came down right around the restricted section," Adam said. "Then it is fortunate that section is already closed to foot traffic," Graves said. "I will have it noted in the log. Thank you for the report, Ranger Locke." It was a clean dismissal, polite and final, and Adam let it go, because questioning a supervisor's judgment in his 3rd week on a new job was not a habit he wanted to start. But that night, off-duty, sitting on the porch of the small cabin the station provided him, he found himself pulling out his own old district maps and comparing them against the new ones Cedar Fall had issued. The restricted section did not appear on any older survey. It had been added to the station's internal maps only in the last several years, around, as best he could tell from the file dates in the station archive, the same time Nathaniel Graves had taken over as supervisor. He filed the thought away, the way he filed away an odd track in soft mud, not yet sure what it meant, but certain it meant something. Curiosity, in Adam's experience, was a slow-burning thing. It did not demand action right away. It simply sat in the back of a man's mind, gathering small details, until one day the details added up to more than he could comfortably ignore. Over the next several nights, he found small reasons to extend his patrols closer to the boundary of the restricted section, never quite crossing the line, but close enough to watch. On the third night, he saw the light again, brighter this time, pulsing low over the canopy before dropping fast and silent into the trees. This time, his radio did not just give static. It gave a voice, garbled and broken, speaking words he could not quite make out, before cutting to dead air entirely. He sat in his truck for a long time afterward, hands still on the wheel, telling himself that a malfunctioning radio explained the voice far more easily than anything else. He almost believed that too. It was on the fourth night, when he noticed Graves' own truck parked at the edge of an old logging road that led directly toward the restricted section, far past any hour a supervisor should reasonably be out checking trail conditions, that curiosity finally tipped over into something closer to resolve. He did not approach the truck. He simply noted the time, the location, and the fact that his new supervisor appeared to have business in the one part of Cedar Fall he had specifically told Adam to leave alone. Adam drove back to his cabin that night with a decision already half made, the kind of decision a careful man takes several more days to fully commit to, but the kind that, once made, does not let go easily. He was going to see what was actually out there. He chose a night when Graves had left the station for a supply run 2 towns over, a rare absence that gave Adam a full evening with no one watching the radio logs or the gate. He parked at the farthest trailhead and walked the rest of the way in on foot, headlamp off, relying on moonlight and a decade of trail sense to keep him on solid ground. The restricted section, when he finally crossed into it, did not look any different from the surrounding forest at first. Old-growth pine, thick underbrush, the same quiet that had settled over the whole valley since he had arrived. But as he moved deeper, he began to notice the trees themselves had a strange uniformity to their spacing, almost too regular, as though something had cleared and replanted this entire section decades ago and let it grow back just imperfectly enough to pass for wild. He found the clearing a little past midnight. It sat in a low bowl of land, ringed by trees that leaned slightly outward, as though something had pushed through their crowns at some point in the past, and the ground at the center was scorched in a wide, perfect circle, blackened grass radiating outward in patterns too symmetrical to be natural. There was no light, no ship, nothing visible at all sitting in the clearing that night. But there was a low hum in the air, faint and steady, the kind of sound a man feels in his chest before he consciously hears it, and Adam stood at the edge of that scorched circle for a long time, certain that whatever made that hum was very close, and very deliberately staying hidden from him. He found the depression in the ground almost by accident, his boot catching on the edge of something that gave slightly underfoot, not soil, but metal, cold and smooth beneath a thin layer of dirt and pine needles that had clearly been arranged to hide it. He crouched and brushed the dirt away with his hands, and the dim moonlight caught the edge of a surface unlike anything he had ever seen, dark and faintly reflective, curving downward into the earth at an angle that suggested something large was buried just beneath the clearing floor. The hum grew slightly louder as he knelt there, and a thin seam of pale light appeared along the buried surface, tracing a long curving line through the dirt before the whole panel shifted, soundlessly, sliding inward to reveal a narrow gap and a soft blue glow rising up from somewhere below. Adam's first instinct, the one 10 years of wilderness training had drilled into him, was to back away immediately and report what he had found through proper channels. His second instinct, the one that had gotten him into every bit of trouble he had ever caused himself, was to lean closer and look. He never got the chance to decide between the two. A grip closed around his ankle from inside the gap, not painful, but absolutely immovable, and before he could shout or pull free, the ground beneath him simply was not ground anymore, and Adam lock dropped through the opening into the dark, silent space below the forest floor. He landed hard on a surface that gave slightly under his weight, soft in a way no metal should have been, and scrambled upright immediately, headlamp clicking on out of reflex. The light revealed a curved chamber, low-ceilinged, walls the same dark material as the panel above, faintly luminous in patches that pulsed in rhythm with the hum he had felt in the clearing. There was no visible door, no visible mechanism, nothing that resembled any structure he had ever stood inside. "Hello," he called out, his voice sounding small and strange against the curved walls. "This is Ranger Adam Locke, Cedar Falls Station. I'm not here to cause any trouble. I would like a way out." Nothing answered, but the pulsing light along the walls shifted color slightly, blue deepening toward violet, and Adam had the distinct, uncomfortable sense that something had hurt him and was deciding how to respond. He moved along the curve of the wall, searching for any seam or panel like the one he had fallen through, and found instead a section of wall that brightened sharply at his touch, resolving into something like a screen, displaying shapes and symbols that meant nothing to him, sequences of light arranged in patterns too precise to be random. A second grip, gentler than the first but just as immovable, closed around his shoulder from behind. Adam spun, fists already coming up, and found himself face to face, for the first time, with something that was not human, and was not, by any measure he had ever been trained to use, an animal either. It stood roughly his own height, its form pale and smooth, limbs longer and thinner than a man's, its face an unsettling blend of familiar and entirely wrong, two large dark eyes set in features that held no expression Adam could read at all. It made no move to attack him, simply held his shoulder in that gentle, unbreakable grip, and tilted its head slightly, studying him the way Graves had studied him on his first day at the station. Adam's training screamed at him to fight, to run, to do anything other than stand still in front of something so far outside any threat he had ever been prepared for. But something about the stillness of the creature, the absence of any obvious aggression in its posture, kept his hands from swinging. "I do not know what you are," he said, his voice unsteady despite his best effort to keep it level. "But I would like to leave." The creature released his shoulder and stepped back, and the wall behind it brightened further, the strange symbols resolving, slowly and impossibly, into something closer to language, English words assembling themselves out of light as though something were learning, in real time, exactly how to speak to him. "Welcome," the wall read. "You are safe." Adam stared at the words for a long moment, then back at the creature, and felt the careful, ordered version of the world he had carried with him for 34 years quietly come apart at the seams. "Safe," he repeated. "From what?" The creature did not answer in words. It simply turned and gestured with one long limb toward a passage opening in the wall that had not been there a moment before, and waited for him to decide whether he would follow. Every instinct told Adam to refuse. But the panel above him had sealed shut the moment he hit the floor, and a quick search of the curved chamber walls found no other visible exit, and the creature showed no sign of forcing him anywhere, simply waiting, patient in a way that felt almost worse than aggression would have. He followed. The passage beyond opened into a much larger space, a long corridor lined with the same faintly glowing walls, and as he walked he began to notice details that made his stomach tighten with every step. Alcoves set into the walls at intervals, each holding shapes draped in soft cloth, human-shaped, still, unmoving. He stopped at the nearest one and pulled the cloth back, against every careful instinct he had, and found himself looking down at the sleeping face of a man he did not recognize, dressed in clothes decades out of style, breathing slow and even, undisturbed by Adam's presence at all. "Who is this?" Adam said, more to himself than to the creature beside him. The wall nearest him brightened again. "Preserved," he read. "Not harmed." "Preserved from what?" The answer came slower this time, the light assembling itself with what felt almost like reluctance. "From time," the wall finally read. From an ending they did not need to see. Adam looked down the long corridor, at alcove after alcove stretching further than his headlamp could fully illuminate, dozens of sleeping shapes, and understood, with a creeping dread that settled deep into his chest, that he had stumbled into something far larger and far older than a single buried ship hidden beneath a restricted section of forest. He kept walking because standing still in that corridor felt somehow more dangerous than moving forward, and because some part of him, the same part that had crouched beside that hidden panel against every sane instinct, needed to understand what he had found. The corridor eventually opened into a wide circular room, its ceiling rising higher than anything he had seen so far, ringed with more of the alcoves, dozens upon dozens of them stretching upward in tiers like the inside of some vast silent amphitheater built entirely for the sleeping. At the center of the room stood a raised platform, and on it, a single figure that was not draped in cloth like the others, standing upright, very still, watching Adam approach with eyes that, even from a distance, struck him as familiar in a way he could not immediately place. It was only when he drew closer, close enough to make out the pale, narrow features beneath the strange smoothness of the alien form, that recognition hit him like a physical blow. "Graves," Adam said, the name coming out of him in a whisper before he could stop it. The figure on the platform did not deny it. It simply inclined its head, slowly, in something that might have been a nod, or might have been an apology, and the wall behind it brightened with new words that Adam read with a cold, sinking certainty settling into every part of him. "Your supervisor," the light read. And something older than that title ever meant. Adam stood frozen at the edge of the platform, every instinct that had carried him safely through 10 years in the wilderness telling him, in no uncertain terms, that he was now standing very close to something far more dangerous than any animal he had ever encountered on a trail. "You are Graves," he said again, needing to hear himself say it before he could believe it. "You have been my supervisor for 3 weeks. The figure's form shifted, slowly and without any visible strain, the alien smoothness reshaping itself into the familiar pale, narrow features Adam had sat across a desk from less than a day earlier. Even the voice, when it finally came, was unmistakably Graves' own measured tone. "I have been many things to many people, Ranger Locke, across a great deal more time than your records would ever account for. Cedar Fall has needed a supervisor for as long as it has needed quiet, and I have found it useful, over the years, to be both." "What is this place?" Adam asked, gesturing at the tiers of alcoves rising around them. "A shelter," Graves said simply. "Built long before your country had a name, for a purpose that has very little to do with the harm your stories tend to imagine when they picture something like me standing where I am standing now." "Then why hide it?" Adam said. "Why bury it under a forest and put a fence around it and a quiet man behind a desk to keep people like me from ever finding it?" Graves studied him for a long moment, that same patient, unreadable stillness Adam had noticed on his very first day, and said, finally, "Because the last time we did not hide it carefully enough, Ranger Locke, a great many people died finding out why." The words hung in the wide chamber for a long moment, and Adam felt the careful authority in Graves' voice settle over him like a held breath. "Whose people?" Adam asked. "Yours or mine?" "Both," Graves said. "It is rarely only one side that pays for these mistakes." He stepped down from the platform, moving with the same unhurried calm Adam remembered from the station office, and gestured toward the ring tiers of alcoves rising above them. "These are not prisoners, Ranger Locke, whatever your instincts are currently insisting. They are travelers, displaced by circumstances far larger than this forest, sheltered here while a longer journey is prepared for them. Some have slept for decades already. A few have slept far longer than that. And the man I saw," Adam said, "dressed like he stepped out of another time entirely. One of the earliest," Graves said, "found wandering this valley nearly 70 years ago, lost and freezing, with nowhere left to go after a winter that should have killed him outright. We do not take people who are not already lost, Ranger Locke. We do not take people the world is not already prepared to forget." Something cold moved through Adam's chest at that. And the missing hikers. The ones the old case files at the station never explained. Graves' expression did not change, but something in his pale eyes finally, fully confirmed what Adam had already begun to suspect. "Yes," Graves said quietly. "Some of them are here too." Adam felt his pulse climbing, the careful calm he had been holding on to since the platform finally beginning to crack under the weight of that single, quiet confirmation. "You are telling me you took people," he said. "People who had families looking for them. People whose names are still sitting in unsolved files back at the station." "I am telling you," Graves said, his voice still maddeningly even, "that this forest has always taken people, long before I arrived to manage it more carefully than it managed itself. Storms, foes, animals. The simple, brutal math of wilderness. I have only ever intervened with the ones already beyond saving by any means your world possesses, and offered them something other than an unmarked grave the forest would have given them anyway. That is not your choice to make, Adam said, his voice rising now, the careful professionalism he had carried into every interaction with his new supervisor finally burning away. You do not get to decide who disappears and call it kindness. And yet someone has always had to decide, Graves said, something sharper entering his tone for the first time. Long before either of us stood in this room, Ranger Locke. The only question that has ever truly mattered is whether the deciding is done with care or without it. Adam did not have an answer for that, not one that felt clean or simple, and the silence that followed stretched long enough that the hum in the walls around them seemed, for a moment, to grow louder, as though the whole vast chamber were waiting on him to speak first. It was the sound of footsteps, soft and uneven, echoing from one of the side passages, that finally broke the silence between them. A man stepped into the wide chamber, blinking against the pale light, dressed in a faded ranger uniform that Adam did not recognize from any current Cedar Fall roster, his face lined with an exhaustion that seemed older than his years should have allowed. "Graves," the man said, his voice rough as though it had not been used in some time. "You said this would be the last one. You said 3 weeks ago you would not be bringing anyone else down here." Graves' composure flickered, just slightly at the sight of him. "Ranger Doyle, I did not expect you to be awake yet." "I have been awake for 2 days," Doyle said, his eyes moving from Graves to Adam with a kind of weary recognition. "Long enough to start remembering what station I actually worked for, before I fell off that ridge 5 years ago and apparently decided the easiest thing to do was disappear into a hole in the ground instead of walking back out." Adam stared at the man, at the worn name tag still pinned to his faded uniform, and felt the last of his patience for careful, measured explanations finally give out entirely. "There is another ranger down here," he said, turning back to Graves. "A real one. Not one of your decades-old travelers from another era. One of mine. Doyle came to us injured and freezing, much like the others," Graves said quietly. "I judged, at the time, that the kindest choice available was the same one I have made for nearly 70 years. "Then you judged wrong," Adam said. "And it is time someone finally told you that to your face." The passage Graves led them down spiraled downward rather than up, deeper into the buried structure, the hum in the walls growing steadily louder with every step until it settled into something closer to a low, constant vibration Adam could feel through the soles of his boots. "Where exactly are we going?" Adam asked, watching Doyle's unsteady gait beside him with growing concern. "To the core," Graves said. "The same system that has kept this shelter hidden, and kept its travelers sleeping safely for 70 years, also governs the only exit fast enough to outpace what is coming." "What is coming?" Doyle asked, his voice sharpening with old, half-remembered instinct. Graves paused at a junction in the passage, his pale eyes flicking briefly toward a section of wall that pulsed in a pattern different from the steady glow surrounding it, faster, more erratic. "Word travels, even down here, when a buried system as old as this one is disturbed twice in a single week," Graves said. "Ranger Locke's discovery in the clearing was noticed by more than myself. There are others, elsewhere, who have spent decades wondering whether this shelter still exists, and whether it might finally be time to claim what it has been protecting for them." "Others like you," Adam said. "Others rather unlike me," Graves said, his voice going colder than Adam had heard it yet. "I chose 70 years ago to manage this place with whatever care a quiet desk job and a careful fence could provide. Not everyone who might come looking for it now will share that particular preference." The vibration grew sharper as they descended, and twice Adam felt the passage walls shudder faintly around them, a sensation he would have dismissed as imagination anywhere else, but here, in a place built by hands he still could not fully picture, felt unmistakably real. "You said others might come looking," Adam said. "How soon?" "Soon enough that I would prefer we were not standing here discussing it," Graves said, quickening his pace despite Doyle's labored breathing beside them. "The shelter systems alert more than myself when its presence is disturbed. I have spent 70 years hoping that alert would never need to mean anything at all." They reached the core sooner than Adam expected, a vast chamber far below the sleeping tiers, dominated by a pulsing column of light that rose from floor to ceiling, surrounded by control surfaces unlike anything in the rest of the structure, older somehow, worn smooth by use rather than simply grown into shape the way the rest of the walls seemed to have been. "This is the heart of the shelter," Graves said, moving to the column with the ease of long familiarity. "It can open a passage directly to the surface, far faster than the route you fell through, but it requires the system's full attention to do so safely, which means, for a short while, every other safeguard in this place, every door, every alcove seal, will be open as well." "You are telling me there is a window," Adam said, "where anything down here could simply walk out." "I am telling you," Graves said, "that I am about to make a choice I have spent 70 years specifically avoiding, and I would ask that whatever judgment you are forming about me right now, you save until after you have seen what walking out that door actually costs." Graves' hands moved across the worn surfaces with practiced precision, and the column of light at the center of the chamber brightened sharply, the steady hum rising into something closer to a low, building roar. "The opening will form above us, in the same clearing you found, Ranger Locke," Graves said, raising his voice over the noise. "It will hold for a matter of minutes only. I would suggest moving quickly once it does." "And the others you mentioned," Adam said. "The ones who might be coming." "If they arrive before that window closes," Graves said, "I would suggest moving very quickly indeed." The chamber shuddered, harder this time, dust and loose debris falling from the high ceiling, and a section of wall near the entrance they had come through began to glow with the same erratic pulse Graves had pointed out earlier, brighter now, spreading. Doyle staggered against the nearest console, his strength clearly failing faster than his determination, and Adam moved to support him, one arm under the older ranger's shoulder, his eyes fixed on the widening tier of light forming directly above the central column. "That is the way out," Adam said, more statement than question. "That is the way out," Graves confirmed. "Go now, both of you. I will hold the system steady as long as I am able, but I cannot promise you it will be long enough if our visitors arrive before you clear the opening." Adam hesitated, Doyle's weight heavy against his shoulder, his eyes moving from the widening light above to the pale, still figure of his supervisor standing at the controls. "You are not coming with us," he said. It was not really a question either. "Someone has to hold this chamber steady while the opening forms," Graves said simply. "And there are still dozens of sleeping travelers in the tiers above us who did not ask to be woken into whatever is about to happen down here. I will not leave them undefended, Ranger Locke, whatever else you have decided to believe about me tonight." "You spent 5 years deciding things for him," Adam said, nodding toward Doyle, "that were not yours to decide. Maybe it is time someone returns the favor and tells you that staying down here to die for a room full of strangers is not the noble ending you think it is." Something flickered across Graves' pale features, surprise perhaps, or something closer to it than Adam had seen from him all night. "I appreciate the sentiment, Ranger Locke," Graves said, "but the opening requires someone at these controls the entire time it remains active, or it will collapse before either of you reaches the surface. There is no version of tonight where all 3 of us walk out of this chamber together." The wall near the entrance brightened further, and a low, distant sound, not quite mechanical and not quite a voice, rolled through the passage behind them. "They are closer than I hoped," Graves said quietly. "Go." "I mean it this time." Adam moved Doyle toward the base of the light column, the air around it warm and faintly electric against his skin, and looked back one last time at the figure standing alone at the controls. "This is not over," Adam said. "Whatever you are, whatever you have spent 70 years deciding alone down here, I am coming back for answers once we are both safely out of this hole." "I would not have it any other way, Ranger Locke," Graves said, something almost like the ghost of a smile crossing his unreadable features. "It has been a very long time since anyone down here argued with my decisions quite so persistently. I find, to my own surprise, that I have rather missed it." The light column surged, and the ground beneath Adam's feet seemed to drop away in the same disorienting rush he remembered from his fall into the chamber hours earlier, except this time the motion ran upward instead of down, fast and weightless and entirely silent. He came back to himself standing in the scorched clearing, cold night air hitting his face, Doyle slumping heavily against him, both of them blinking against moonlight that felt, after the strange pulsing glow of the chamber below, almost painfully ordinary. Behind them, the panel in the clearing floor sealed shut with a soft mechanical hiss, the faint hum beneath the earth fading away to nothing, leaving only the familiar sound of wind moving through pine branches, as though the entire night had simply folded itself back into the quiet forest it had come from. Adam got Doyle to the truck on legs that shook with exhaustion and adrenaline both, and drove the rest of the way back to the station in a kind of stunned silence. The older ranger slumped against the passenger door, eyes open but distant, watching trees pass in the headlights like a man relearning the simple fact of their existence. 5 years, Doyle said quietly, somewhere on the long drive back. My wife thinks I am dead. My daughter was 8 when I went over that ridge. She is 13 now. I missed 5 birthdays sitting in a hole in the ground because a creature wearing a man's face decided dying on a mountainside was not the ending I deserved. I do not have a way to make that right for you, Adam said honestly. I do not think anyone does. But you are alive and you are out, and that has to count for something even now. Doyle did not answer for a long while, and Adam let the silence sit, because there was nothing useful left to fill it with. It was nearly dawn by the time they reached the station, and Adam called it in immediately, every protocol he knew telling him this was a matter for far more than a single ranger to manage alone. Authorities would need to be told. Doyle's family would need to be found, gently, carefully, after 5 years of believing the worst. What Adam did not call in, not yet, not until he had decided exactly how to put it into words that anyone might believe, was the buried shelter itself, the sleeping travelers in their tears, or the supervisor who had stayed behind in a chamber deep beneath Cedar Falls forest floor, holding a door open against whatever else might be coming for it. The days that followed moved faster than Adam expected, official vehicles and unfamiliar faces filling the small Cedar Falls station almost overnight once Doyle's identity was confirmed and his 5-year absence became impossible to file away as anything ordinary. Adam told the truth, mostly leaving out only the parts he was certain no official report would survive intact. A hidden structure in the restricted section. A supervisor who had not been entirely what he appeared. Doyle, found alive after years presumed dead, his exact circumstances still under careful, ongoing review. He did not mention the alcoves, the dozens of sleeping travelers still resting somewhere beneath that scorched clearing, or the strange, unfinished promise he had made to a being he was no longer certain how to describe in any report a normal supervisor would believe. When investigators finally cleared a path into the restricted section, following Adam's coordinates, they found the clearing exactly as he had described it, scorched ground, buried panel, the faint residual hum still detectable in careful instrument readings. But when they pried the panel open, expecting to find the vast underground structure Adam had walked through that night, they found instead a small, empty chamber, barely larger than a single room, long abandoned, its walls bare and cold and entirely unremarkable. There is nothing else down here, the lead investigator told Adam, not unkindly, the tone of a man trying to be gentle with someone who had clearly been through more than his report could capture. Whatever you found that night, Ranger Locke, it does not appear to be here anymore. Adam stood at the edge of the empty chamber for a long time after the investigators moved on, staring down at bare walls that bore no resemblance to the vast tiered structure he remembered walking through, and felt a cold, creeping doubt settle into the certainty he had carried out of that forest only days earlier. He almost convinced himself, standing there, that exhaustion and shock had built something in his mind that simple stress and a strange light in the sky did not fully explain. Almost. Doyle's continued existence, recovering slowly under careful medical supervision 2 towns over, remained the one piece of evidence that refused to fold neatly into any ordinary explanation. A man presumed dead for 5 years, found exactly where Adam said he would be, his story matching every strange, impossible detail Adam had reported. That evening, back at his cabin, Adam found a small, smooth object sitting on his porch step that had not been there that morning, dark and faintly warm to the touch, etched with a single curving symbol he recognized immediately from the glowing wall displays deep beneath that clearing. There was no note. There did not need to be one. He understood, holding it in his palm under the porch light, that Nathaniel Graves had survived whatever had come for that chamber, and had found, even now, a way to remind him that the conversation between them was not, in fact, finished, regardless of what the official investigation chose to officially conclude. Cedar Fall assigned a new supervisor within the month, a brisk, practical woman named Reyes who had no patience for strange lights or restricted sections and ran the station with the kind of straightforward efficiency that made Adam's strange first weeks feel, increasingly, like a story from someone else's life. He kept the smooth dark object in a drawer in his cabin, taking it out occasionally on quiet nights to turn it over in his hands, studying the curving symbol for meanings he was fairly certain he would never fully decode on his own. Doyle's reunion with his family made the local news, brief and carefully vague about the actual circumstances of his 5-year disappearance, the official story settling on an unspecified medical condition and a remarkable, unlikely recovery. Adam visited him once more before Doyle moved away to rebuild a life that had been frozen, then suddenly thawed, in ways neither of them fully understood. "Do you think he is still down there?" Doyle asked him, during that last visit. "Whatever he was. Wherever that chamber actually went." "I do not know," Adam admitted. "But I do not think Cedar Fall has seen the last of him, whatever the official report says about an empty room and a quiet, abandoned structure." Doyle considered that for a long moment, then nodded slowly, the way a man nods at a truth he has decided to simply accept rather than keep fighting. "For what it is worth," he said, "I am glad it was you who found that clearing, and not someone who would have simply walked away from what they saw inside it." Months passed quietly, the kind of quiet Adam had originally been promised on his very first day at Cedar Fall, and he found himself, gradually, settling into the rhythm of the station the way he had settled into every posting before it, trail by trail, season by season. He did not stop watching the northwest corner of the map, even with the restricted section officially declassified and reopened to limited foot traffic, its scorched clearing fenced off as an unremarkable old survey site with a small, official sign explaining nothing at all. It was nearly a year later, on a cold autumn night much like the one that had started everything, that he saw the light again. It did not descend into the restricted section this time. It crossed slowly over the entire valley instead, high and distant, pulsing the same pale blue-white he remembered, before sliding silently behind the ridge to the east and disappearing entirely. Adam stood on his porch and watched it go, the smooth dark object from his drawer sitting warm in his palm, the curving symbol etched across its surface seeming, for just a moment, to pulse faintly in answer to whatever had just passed overhead. He did not call it in. He did not chase it down a logging road or cross any restricted boundary to investigate. He simply watched it go and felt, for reasons he could not entirely explain even to himself, less afraid of it than he had felt the very first time he had seen that strange light drop silently into his forest. The second visit came not long after, not in the sky, but at his door, late on a night when the wind had finally turned cold enough to mean winter was close. Adam opened the door already half expecting who he would find standing there, and Nathaniel Graves looked exactly as he had on that first day in the station office, calm, composed, pale eyes settling on Adam with the same unreadable patience. "I did not think I would see you again," Adam said, stepping back to let him in out of the cold, old habits of hospitality outweighing whatever caution might have argued against it. "I did not think you would want to," Graves said, settling into the chair across from Adam's small kitchen table without waiting for an invitation. "I held that chamber's systems long enough for the opening to seal behind you and Ranger Doyle, and longer still after that, against guests who were considerably less patient than either of us expected to survive." "And the others sleeping in those tiers?" Adam asked. "The travelers." "Moved," Graves said simply. "To a shelter farther from any forest a curious ranger might wander into uninvited. I have grown, over these past months, somewhat more careful about exactly where I choose to keep secrets this large." Adam studied him for a long moment, weighing the strange, complicated trust that had built itself, almost against his will, over one impossible night nearly a year earlier. "Why are you here, Graves?" he asked finally. "Really?" Graves did not answer immediately. He looked instead around the small kitchen, at the worn maps pinned to Adam's wall, the careful order of a life built entirely around understanding a single stretch of wilderness as thoroughly as one man reasonably could. I have spent a very long time, Ranger Locke, deciding things alone, he said finally. 70 years of careful, quiet judgments, made without anyone to argue the other side of them. You were the first person in all that time who stood in front of me and insisted, simply and stubbornly, that I did not get to keep making those decisions entirely by myself. That does not answer my question, Adam said. No, Graves admitted. I suppose it does not. He paused, and something in his careful composure shifted, just slightly, into something closer to honesty than Adam had heard from him even in that buried chamber. I am here because the shelter still needs careful management, wherever it is now hidden, and I find, to my own considerable surprise, that I trust very few people enough to ask for help with that. You are, somewhat inconveniently, one of them. You are asking me to help you hide an alien shelter full of sleeping travelers, Adam said flatly. I am asking you, Graves said, to help me decide, with someone else finally in the room, whether hiding them at all is still the kindest choice available, or whether it is simply the oldest habit I have left. Adam sat with that for a long time, the kitchen quiet except for the wind outside and the low, steady tick of the old clock above his stove, and thought about Doyle, 5 years stolen and given back unevenly, and about the dozens of still sleeping figures he had walked past in that vast tiered chamber, never once asked in 70 years what they themselves might have wanted. I am not agreeing to keep secrets the way you have kept them, Adam said finally. Not blindly. Not for 70 more years without anyone else ever getting a vote. I would not ask that of you, Graves said. I am asking only for a second voice in the deciding, Ranger Locke. Nothing more. Then I want to see them, Adam said. All of them. I want to know their names, where they came from, whether any of them, given the choice, would prefer waking up over staying asleep for however many more decades you have planned for them. Graves studied him for a long moment, and something in his pale, ancient eyes finally settled into what looked, unmistakably, like relief. That, he said quietly, is precisely the question I have been too afraid to ask alone, for far longer than I am entirely comfortable admitting. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the old windows of Adam's cabin, and somewhere far above the valley, faint and distant, a pale blue-white light crossed slowly behind the clouds, patient, watching, waiting to see what would be decided next. Adam Locke still works the Cedar Fall district, though his patrols, these days, sometimes carry him farther than any official map will admit to, into conversations and decisions that no ranger handbook was ever written to cover. He does not know yet how the larger questions will resolve, whether the sleeping travelers will choose to wake, whether the world above them is ready, even now, to learn what has been quietly sheltered beneath its forests for the better part of a century. Those answers are still being worked out, slowly, carefully, by two very different beings who have finally agreed that deciding everything alone was never truly a kindness at all. He keeps the small dark object on his desk now, instead of hidden away in a drawer, its curving symbol catching the morning light through his cabin window most days like a quiet, steady reminder of exactly how much he still does not understand. Doyle calls him sometimes from a life slowly rebuilding itself 2 states away, and Adam tells him, honestly, that Cedar Fall remains as quiet as ever on the surface, and considerably less quiet underneath it. On clear autumn nights, when the wind is still and the stars sit close and sharp above the valley, Adam sometimes walks out to the edge of the old restricted section, long since reopened, and watches the sky above the ridge, waiting, without any particular fear left in the waiting, to see if the light will come again. It usually does. And when it does, for the first time since that very first impossible night, Adam Locke does not feel like a man stumbling into something far larger than himself. He feels, instead, like a man who has finally been let in on the decision. If you like that story, please like and subscribe, and feel free to comment what you would like to hear next. I read all comments and would love the feedback.